I was 9 months pregnant, clinging to the metal pole of the crowded Seattle subway, when my husband, Michael, suddenly yanked me out of my seat. His voice cut through the murmurs of strangers like a whip. "Respect my mother first." Gasps filled the carriage. I stumbled, my swollen belly tightening as the baby shifted inside me, while his mother, Helen, lowered herself into the seat with a smug sigh. Everyone stared. Their silence was louder than the screeching wheels of the train. My face burned, my knees shook, and all I could do was grip the pole and try not to collapse. That's when she appeared, an older woman with silver hair, leaning heavily on her cane. Frail in body but sharp-eyed, she stood from her own seat, walked toward me, and whispered 3 words that struck like lightning. Through the carriage. God sees everything. Simple words, quiet words. But in that moment they echoed through the subway car like thunder. Every passenger heard them. Every passenger felt them. And every passenger turned to look at my husband with unmistakable judgment in their eyes. Michael's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mother shifted, uncomfortably in the seat that should have been mine. "Young man," the silver-haired woman continued, her voice stronger now, "what kind of father will you be if you cannot respect the mother of your child?" A businessman in a crisp suit stood up. "Take my seat, ma'am," he said, looking directly at me. Another woman moved her bag. "Here's another one for when your mother-in-law decides to find her." Manners. The subway car, moments ago a place of my humiliation, transformed into a courtroom where Michael and Helen had been tried and sentenced in seconds. My husband's face flushed crimson. He couldn't look anyone in the eye, least of all me. The silver-haired woman guided me to the newly offered seat. As I sank into it, relief washing over my aching back, she patted my hand. "I'm Mabel," she whispered. "And you're not alone, dear." That was the moment I knew everything had to change. Because Mabel was right. God does see everything. And so did everyone else on that train. The public mask my husband and his mother had worn for so long had finally slipped, revealing the ugly truth beneath, the truth I'd been denying for far too long. I met Michael 3 years earlier at a charity fundraiser in downtown Seattle. I was working as an event coordinator, making sure everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. He was a guest, tall, with kind eyes and an easy smile that made the room feel warmer. When he approached me after the event to compliment my work, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Seen. "You made it all look effortless," he said. "But I noticed how hard you were working." 3 months later, we were inseparable. 6 months after that, he proposed on the ferry to Bainbridge Island, the Seattle skyline glittering behind us like it was celebrating along with us. I said yes without hesitation. Michael was thoughtful, stable, and genuinely interested in my dreams. I'd inherited my grandmother's apartment in Queen Anne, a cozy 2-bedroom with bay windows, and a tiny balcony, and Michael seemed perfectly content to move in with me after the wedding. "It's a perfect starter home," he'd said, kissing my forehead. "And it means something to you. That makes it special." I should have noticed the red flag in that single word, starter. As if my grandmother's cherished apartment, the place where I'd spent summers as a child, where I'd moved after college, to start my adult life, where I'd nursed my grandmother through her final days, was just a temporary stop on the way to something better, something more suitable to the image Michael had of our future. But I didn't see it then. I was too caught up in the whirlwind of wedding planning, too distracted by the promise of forever with someone who seemed to value me exactly as I was. And then I met Helen. She arrived a week before the wedding, sweeping into my apartment like she was conducting an inspection. Nothing escaped her critical eye. Not the slightly worn sofa. You'll want to replace that before you have children. Not the mismatched dining chairs. Family meals require proper seating, Claire. Not even my collection of vintage teacups from my grandmother. Charming, I suppose, but hardly practical. Michael just smiled apologetically and whispered, "She means well. She just wants the best for us." The wedding was beautiful despite Helen's constant suggestions. We honeymooned in Victoria, British Columbia for a long weekend. All Michael could take off work. And when we returned, I thought life would settle into the rhythm we'd established before. Me working at the event planning company, Michael at his accounting firm, evenings spent cooking together or exploring Seattle's neighborhoods. I was wrong. Helen didn't go back to Portland as planned. Instead, she found a condo 20 minutes from our apartment. "It's just temporary," Michael assured me, "until she gets settled in Seattle." Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Helen became a fixture in our lives, dropping by unannounced, rearranging my kitchen cabinets while I was at work, leaving brochures for bigger apartments on our coffee table. When she wasn't physically present, she was calling Michael, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day with emergencies that always seemed to interrupt our rare moments alone. I tried to talk to Michael about it. "I feel like we never have any privacy," I said one night after Helen had finally left after an unplanned 6-hour visit. "She's just lonely," he replied, not looking up from his phone. "Her whole life was in Portland. All her friends. Now she's starting over, and we're all she has." "But why did she move here in the first place?" I pressed. "Her life was established there." Michael's expression hardened slightly. "She moved here for us, Claire, because family sticks together." I let it drop. It wasn't worth the argument, I told myself. I could be patient. I could be understanding. After all, wasn't that what marriage was about? Compromise? But month by month, compromise began to feel a lot like surrender. Helen didn't just visit. She colonized. She didn't just make suggestions. She made decisions. And slowly, the apartment that had once been my sanctuary became foreign territory where I felt increasingly unwelcome. When I discovered I was pregnant, I was overjoyed and terrified. A baby would change everything. But maybe, just maybe, it would help establish boundaries. Michael and I would need privacy, space to become parents without Helen's constant oversight. I was wrong about that too. The pregnancy only intensified Helen's presence in our lives. She insisted on coming to every doctor's appointment. She filled our apartment with baby books that contradicted everything my obstetrician told me. She started referring to herself not as Grandma, but as Mama Helen, a title that made my skin crawl. "Don't you think that might be confusing for the baby?" I asked Michael one night. His response chilled me. "Mom raised 3 kids successfully, Claire. I think she knows what she's doing better than we do." As my belly grew, so did Helen's control, and Michael's deference to it. By my 3rd trimester, she had moved into our guest room, just until the baby comes, to help me. Help meant criticizing my diet, commenting on my weight gain, and telling horror stories about labor complications to anyone who would listen. And through it all, Michael became increasingly distant from me and increasingly attentive to his mother's every need, which is how I ended up, 9 months pregnant, standing on a crowded subway while my mother-in-law took my seat and my husband defended her right to do so. I never saw it coming, but maybe I should have. The subway incident changed everything. As I sat in the seat the businessman had offered, tears threatening to spill down my cheeks, I couldn't look at Michael. I stared at my swollen hands resting on my belly instead, trying to regulate my breathing the way my childbirth class had taught me. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. I felt a gentle pressure on my shoulder and looked up to see Mabel, the silver-haired woman, watching me with concern in her eyes. "Your stop is next, isn't it, dear?" she asked, loudly enough for the entire car to hear. "My husband Frank and I can help you off. You shouldn't be on your feet in your condition." I hadn't told her my stop. I hadn't told her anything. But in that moment, I understood she was offering me an escape route, and I grabbed it with both hands. "Yes," I whispered. "Thank you." Michael stepped toward me, his face a mask of confusion and wounded pride. "Claire, we're not getting off for 3 more stops." "I need some air," I said, not meeting his eyes. "I'll meet you at home." "Don't be ridiculous," Helen interjected from her stolen seat. "Michael, tell her to stop making a scene. It's not good for the baby." The irony of her words might have made me laugh if I hadn't been so close to breaking. The doors slid open, and Mabel's husband, a tall, sturdy man with kind eyes, appeared at my side, helping me to my feet with surprising strength for someone his age. "Come on, young lady," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Let's get you some fresh air." Michael started to protest, but the look Frank gave him, the look of a man who had seen enough and would not tolerate one more word, silenced him mid-sentence. As we stepped off the train, I heard murmurs from the other passengers, saw heads shaking in disapproval, caught fragments of whispered judgments directed at my husband and mother-in-law. The doors closed behind us. Through the window, I caught one last glimpse of Michael's face, stunned, embarrassed, angry, before the train pulled away. "There now," Mabel said, guiding me to a bench. "Sit down and catch your breath." Frank stood protectively nearby, his weathered hands clasped in front of him. "That young man," he said, shaking his head slowly, "needs to decide what kind of man he wants to be." I burst into tears. All the emotions I'd been suppressing, the hurt, the frustration, the growing fear that I'd made a terrible mistake, came pouring out in great, heaving sobs that echoed through the station. Mabel sat beside me, her thin arm around my shoulders, saying nothing, just letting me cry. When I finally caught my breath, I looked up at these two strangers who had intervened so decisively in one of the most humiliating moments of my life. "Thank you," I managed. "I don't know what I would have done if—" "Shh," Mabel soothed. "You don't need to explain anything to us. But I think you might need to explain some things to yourself." Frank nodded, pulling out a handkerchief from his pocket and handing it to me. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the people who should love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest." I dried my tears, feeling strangely calm in the presence of these elderly guardians who had appeared when I needed them most. "I should go home," I said, though the word home felt hollow now. "Do you have someone you can call?" Mabel asked. "Someone besides your husband?" I thought about it. My father, Frank Donovan, lived across town. We'd grown apart after my mother's death when I was in college, grief affecting us in different ways, pulling us in different directions. But he had been trying lately, calling more, often, asking about the baby, offering to help with the nursery. "My dad," I said finally. "I can call my dad." Mabel smiled. "Good. Call him. And while you wait for him, maybe we can sit with you? Frank and I don't have anywhere special to be." I nodded gratefully and pulled out my phone. My father answered on the second ring. "Claire, everything okay? Is it the baby?" His immediate concern made my throat tight again. "No, Dad, the baby's fine. I need a ride. I'm at the University Street station. Could you come get me?" There was a brief pause, and I could almost see him checking his watch, rearranging whatever plans he might have had. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Sit tight." When I hung up, Mabel took my hand in her papery one. "Marriage is hard work," she said, her eyes distant with memory. "Frank and I have been married 52 years. Had our share of rough patches." Frank chuckled. "That's putting it mildly, Mabel." She smiled up at him with such obvious affection that it made my heart ache. "But there's one thing we always maintained, even when we couldn't agree on anything else. Respect." "Respect," Frank echoed. "Can't build anything lasting without it." "Your husband," Mabel continued carefully, "may have forgotten that, but it doesn't mean he can't remember if he wants to." I looked down at my wedding ring, twisting it around my finger. "What if he doesn't want to?" "Then you'll have choices to make," Frank said simply. "Hard ones." We sat in companionable silence after that, waiting for my father to arrive. Mabel and Frank didn't pry any further, didn't ask for details about my marriage or Helen's behavior. Their presence alone was comfort enough. Two people who had seen something wrong and refused to remain silent. Two people who reminded me that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes it's necessary. When my father's car pulled up outside the station 20 minutes later, Frank helped me to my feet. "You take care of yourself," he said. "And that little one." Mabel pressed a piece of paper into my hand. "Our number," she explained. "If you ever need anything, even just a friendly ear, you call us." I hugged them both, these unexpected angels who had materialized when I needed them most. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." My father was waiting at the curb, his face creased with worry. As I approached, he quickly got out and opened the passenger door for me. "Claire, what happened? Where's Michael?" I didn't answer immediately, just lowered myself carefully into the seat. As he walked around to the driver's side, I caught sight of Mabel and Frank watching from the station entrance. Mabel raised her hand in a small wave, and I waved back, feeling something shift inside me, a resolve forming where uncertainty had been. "Dad," I said as he slid behind the wheel, "I need to talk to you about some things, important things." He looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in years. "Okay," he said simply. "I'm listening." And as we pulled away from the station, I began to tell him everything, about Helen's escalating control, about Michael's betrayal, about the growing fear that the life I was living wasn't the one I had chosen. I didn't know what would happen when I got home. I didn't know what Michael would say or how Helen would spin the story of what had happened on the train. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Things couldn't continue as they were. Not if I wanted to give my child the mother she deserved. A mother with dignity, with self-respect, with the courage to stand up for herself. The baby kicked sharply, as if in agreement, and I placed my hand over the spot, a silent promise passing between us. Something had to change, and it would start with me. My father listened without interruption as I poured out everything. Helen's constant interference, Michael's increasing emotional distance, the subtle ways my authority in my own home had been eroded until I barely recognized my life anymore. When I finished, the car was parked outside his condo, engine off, the silence between us heavy with my revelations. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, Claire?" he finally asked, his voice rough with emotion. I stared out the windshield at the familiar building where I'd spent my teenage years. I was embarrassed. I thought I could fix it. I thought. My voice cracked. I thought maybe it was normal. That marriage just meant disappearing a little. Dad's hand covered mine, warm and steady. "No, sweetheart. That's not what marriage means at all." We sat there for a long moment before he squeezed my hand. "You're staying here tonight. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Michael will be worried." "Let him worry," Dad said, with an edge I rarely heard in his voice. "It might do him some good." Inside, he showed me to the guest room, my old room, still painted the soft blue I'd chosen at 16, though now it housed a comfortable queen bed instead of my teenage twin. "I'll make up the couch," I offered, gesturing to my enormous belly. "I take up too much space these days." "Nonsense," Dad said firmly. "You need proper rest. I've been meaning to try out that new recliner anyway." His attempt at lightness couldn't quite mask his concern. "Do you need anything? Are you hungry?" The mention of food made me realize I was starving. Actually, yes. While Dad heated leftover lasagna, I called Michael. His phone went straight to voicemail. I left a brief message. "I'm safe. I'm at Dad's. I need some space tonight." And then turned off my phone entirely. Whatever conversation needed to happen between us couldn't happen tonight. I was too raw, too hurt, too confused about what I even wanted. After dinner, exhaustion hit me like a wave. Dad insisted I take a shower while he made tea, and standing under the hot water, I felt some of the day's tension begin to dissolve. By the time I emerged in borrowed pajamas that barely stretched over my belly, he had turned down the bed and placed a steaming mug of chamomile on the nightstand. "Get some rest," he said, kissing my forehead like he used to when I was little. "Everything looks different in the morning light." But sleep proved elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's face as he pulled me from that seat. I heard Helen's smug sigh as she sat down. I felt the eyes of strangers witnessing my humiliation, and beneath it all was a question I couldn't escape. How had I let things go so far? I must have finally drifted off, because I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the smell of coffee. For one disoriented moment, I forgot where I was and why. Then reality came crashing back. Checking my phone, I found 17 missed calls and 23 text messages, most from Michael, growing increasingly frantic, but 5 from Helen, each more accusatory than the last. "How could you embarrass Michael like that? You're being dramatic. I raised him to respect his elders. This pregnancy is making you irrational. If you cared about your marriage, you'd be home now." The last message from Michael had come at 3:47 a.m. "Please come home, we need to talk. Mom's really upset." Of course, Helen was upset. Not me, the heavily pregnant woman forced to stand on public transportation. Not me, the wife humiliated in front of strangers. Helen. I set the phone down without replying and walked to the kitchen, where Dad was scrambling eggs. "Morning, sunshine," he said, his forced cheerfulness not quite masking his worry. "How are you feeling?" "Like I need to figure out what happens next," I replied, easing myself onto a kitchen stool. Dad nodded, sliding a plate in front of me. "Eat first. Then we'll talk options." The eggs were perfect, creamy with just enough pepper, and I realized I hadn't enjoyed a meal without Helen's commentary in months. No passive-aggressive remarks about cholesterol or portion size. No reminders about eating for two, while simultaneously suggesting I was gaining too much weight. Just food, prepared with love, to be enjoyed without judgment. "I can't go back there," I said suddenly, setting down my fork. "Not while she's living with us. I can't do it anymore, Dad." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Then you don't go back while she's there. Simple as that." It wasn't. Simple, of course. Nothing about this situation was simple. But something in my father's matter-of-fact tone steadied me. This wasn't an impossible problem. It was a boundary that needed to be drawn, clearly and firmly. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Michael. "I'm staying at Dad's for now. When you're ready to talk, just us, without your mother present, let me know." His reply was, almost instantaneous. "Please come home. I said I was sorry." Had he? I couldn't remember an actual apology, just defensive explanations. I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Michael. I answered with a steady hello that surprised even me. Claire, this is ridiculous. You can't just leave like this. What are people going to think? Not, are you okay? Not, I was wrong. What will people think? I don't care what people think, Michael. I care about how you treated me yesterday. I care about how your mother has taken over our lives. I care about the fact that I don't feel safe or respected in my own home. You're overreacting. It was one bad moment. I was stressed. Mom was tired. It wasn't one moment, I interrupted, my voice stronger now. It was the culmination of hundreds of moments where you've chosen her comfort over mine, where you've dismissed my feelings, where you've let her control our marriage. That's not fair, he protested. She's just trying to help. No, Michael, she's trying to control, and you're letting her. Silence stretched between us, taut with unspoken accusations. What do you want me to do? He finally asked, his voice small. I want you to choose, Michael. Our family, you, me, and this baby, or your mother's approval, because I can't live like this anymore. I won't. Another long pause. She has nowhere else to go. My heart sank. There it was, the choice already made. She has her condo, Michael, the one she's been keeping just in case. Don't pretend you didn't know about it. His sharp intake of breath told me I'd hit a nerve. How did you? I found the paperwork, I said quietly. 3 months ago. In your desk when I was looking for the insurance forms. More silence, heavier this time. I'll be by later to get some things, I said when it became clear he had nothing to say. Please make sure I can do that without complications. Claire, wait. I ended the call, my hands shaking but my mind clearer than it had been in months. Dad, who had been pretending not to listen while washing dishes, turned to me with a question in his eyes. I need a lawyer, I said simply, and an obstetrician appointment. My back's been hurting all morning. He dried his hands on a dish towel. I'll drive you to the clinic. As for the lawyer, I know someone. Sophia Garcia. She handled your mother's estate. Tough as nails. But fair. An hour later, sitting in the waiting room at my doctor's office, I felt the first real contraction. Not the Braxton Hicks I'd been experiencing for weeks. A genuine take-your-breath-away contraction that had me gripping the armrests. Claire? Dad's face swam into focus as the pain receded. What was that? I think, I said, trying to keep my voice level, we might need to postpone that lawyer appointment. The nurse who took my vitals confirmed what I already suspected. I was in early labor, my blood pressure dangerously high. We're admitting you, she said, her tone brooking no argument. Dr. Reynolds wants to monitor you closely. As they wheeled me to labor and delivery, I asked Dad to call Michael. Whatever was happening in our marriage, he deserved to know his child was coming. He's not answering, Dad reported after 3 attempts. Want me to leave a message? I nodded. Another contraction building. Dad's voice seemed to come from very far away as he left a terse voicemail. Michael, it's Frank Donovan. Claire's in labor at Swedish Medical Center. She needs you here now. Then he took my hand, his grip solid and reassuring. I'm right here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. True to his word, Dad stayed through the next 4 hours as my labor progressed rapidly. The doctor, concerned about my blood pressure, discussed the possibility of a C-section if things didn't improve. Through it all, Michael's absence loomed large. An empty space beside my bed where my husband should have been. Finally, as I entered transition, the most intense phase of labor, my phone rang. Dad answered, his expression darkening as he listened. Who is it? I gasped between contractions. Michael, Dad said grimly. He says he can't come right now. His mother had some kind of fall. He's at the ER with her. The pain of that betrayal eclipsed even the physical agony of labor. In the most vulnerable moment of my life, when I needed him most, Michael had chosen Helen again. Give me the phone, I demanded, reaching out despite the IV in my arm. Dad hesitated. Claire, you don't need this stress right now. The phone, Dad, please. He placed it in my hand reluctantly. I put it to my ear just as another contraction began to build. Michael, I said, my voice tight with pain and determination. I'm about to have your child. If you're not here in 30 minutes, don't bother coming at all. I handed the phone back to Dad as the contraction peaked, closing my eyes against both the physical pain and the knowledge that, regardless of Michael's choice in the next half hour, nothing between us would ever be the same again. Michael never showed up. Through the blur of pain and effort, through the doctor's calm instructions and the nurses. Encouragements through the final, overwhelming moments when my daughter finally entered the world with a powerful cry. Michael's absence was a wound as raw as any physical one. "She's perfect," the doctor announced, placing the squirming, indignant bundle on my chest. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. I looked down at her tiny face, scrunched and red with the effort of her arrival, and felt an overwhelming surge of love that pushed everything else aside. Her delicate fingers, her button nose, the surprising amount of dark hair plastered to her head. She was miraculous. "Hello, Lily," I whispered, the name I'd chosen months ago coming naturally to my lips. "I'm your mom." My father, who had stepped out during the final moments of delivery, returned with tear tracks on his weathered cheeks. "She's beautiful, Claire," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely beautiful." A nurse looked up from the computer where she was entering information. "What's her full name for the birth certificate?" I hesitated only briefly. "Lily Madeline Donovan," I said, giving her my surname rather than Michael's. It was an impulse decision, one I might regret later, but in that moment it felt right. This child, who had entered the world without her father's welcome, would carry the name of the family who had shown up for her. Dad's eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing, just placed a gentle hand on Lily's head. "Welcome to the world, little one," he murmured. "You are so loved." The next 24 hours passed in a haze of exhaustion, nursing attempts, vital sign checks, and brief moments of sleep. My phone remained silent. No calls or messages from Michael. No explanation. No apology. The day after Lily's birth, as I was preparing to be discharged, there was a knock at my hospital room door. My heart leapt, thinking perhaps Michael had finally come, but it was Sofia Garcia, the lawyer Dad had mentioned. "I hope this isn't an intrusion," she said, stepping into the room with a small bouquet of yellow roses. "Your father called me yesterday. Congratulations on your daughter." I shifted Lily in my arms, suddenly self-conscious in my hospital gown with my unwashed hair. "Thank you for coming. I'm sorry for the circumstances." Sophia waved away my apology, setting the flowers on the windowsill. "I've worked with new mothers in crisis before. It's never an ideal time, but sometimes it's a necessary one." She glanced at Dad, who nodded and stepped outside to give us privacy. For the next hour, as Lily slept peacefully against my chest, Sophia outlined my options in clear, straightforward terms. Temporary separation, legal custody arrangements, divorce, if it came to that. She didn't push for any particular course of action, simply presented the facts and the potential paths forward. "The most important thing right now," she concluded, closing her leather portfolio, "is to establish boundaries that protect both you and your daughter. We can file for temporary custody immediately, with provisions for supervised visitation if you're comfortable with that." "I don't even know if he wants to see her," I admitted, voicing the fear that had been growing with each hour of Michael's silence. Sophia's expression softened. "That's his loss then. But legally, we need to establish the ground rules from the beginning." When she left, promising to prepare the necessary paperwork, Dad returned with a wheelchair and the discharge nurse. "Ready to go home?" Home. The word caught in my throat. Not the apartment where Michael and Helen waited. Not the space that had once been my sanctuary but had become a battleground. Home was now Dad's condo, at least for the foreseeable future. "Yes," I said, carefully transferring Lily to his arms while the nurse helped me into the wheelchair. "Let's go home." The first week of Lily's life passed in a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and 2 brief naps. Dad proved to be an unexpectedly capable grandfather, eating bottles of pumped milk in the middle of the night when my exhaustion overwhelmed me, cradling Lily against his shoulder with a natural ease that made my heart ache for my own mother. Michael finally called when Lily was 5 days old. I was alone in the apartment, Dad having gone for groceries, when the phone rang. I answered without checking the caller ID, expecting it to be the pediatrician's office returning my call about Lily's slight jaundice. "Claire?" Michael's voice was hesitant, almost unrecognizable. I sat down abruptly on the couch, my legs suddenly weak. "Yes. I want to see the baby." Not, "How are you?" Not, "I'm sorry I missed the birth of our child." Just, "I want to see the baby." "Her name is Lily," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "And yes, you can see her. With supervision, as my lawyer has outlined in the papers you should have received yesterday." A sharp intake of breath. "You got a lawyer? Jesus, Claire, isn't that extreme? We're having a rough patch, not a divorce." "A rough patch?" I repeated incredulously. You abandoned me during labor for your mother's convenience. You haven't called or texted in a week. You haven't asked once how your daughter is doing. That's not a rough patch, Michael. That's a fundamental breakdown. Silence stretched between us, taut with unspoken accusations. Mom's fall was serious, he finally said, his voice defensive. She fractured her hip. She needed surgery. And I was giving birth, I countered, keeping my voice low despite the anger building in my chest. Lily was finally napping after a fussy morning, and I wouldn't disturb her for this conversation. Your mother had an entire medical team. I needed my husband. I couldn't be in two places at once. No, but you could have made a different choice, I said quietly. That's the point, Michael. You've been making the same choice over and over, and it's never been me. Never been us. He sighed heavily. Can I just see the baby? Please? I want to make this right. I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. You can come tomorrow, 3 o'clock. My father will be here. Your father hates me. My father, I said with careful precision, has been more of a support to me and Lily in the past week than you have been in the past 9 months. If you have a problem with his presence, you can arrange visitation through Sophia. After a moment of strained silence, Michael agreed to the terms. We hung up without the familiar "I love you" that had once been automatic, its absence a stark reminder of how much had changed. The next day, at precisely 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Dad gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze before going to answer it. I sat in the living room armchair, Lily cradled against me, and tried to prepare myself for whatever was about to happen. Michael entered hesitantly, looking like he'd aged years in a week. His eyes were shadowed, his clothes rumpled, his normally neat hair uncombed. He carried an enormous pink teddy bear and a gift bag overflowing with tissue paper. His gaze went immediately to the bundle in my arms, his expression softening with something like awe. Is that your daughter? I confirmed, adjusting Lily so he could see her face. Lily Madeline. He took a step forward, then another, the gifts forgotten in his hands. She's so small, he whispered. Do you want to hold her? Michael looked startled by the offer, then nodded eagerly. Dad, hovering in the doorway like a sentinel, moved forward to take the gifts and guide Michael to the couch. I carefully transferred Lily to her father's arms, showing him how to support her head. The moment should have been beautiful, a father meeting his daughter for the first time. Instead, it was overlaid with tension and regret, with all the words we weren't saying, all the hurt we hadn't addressed. She has your eyes, Michael said after a long silence, looking up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Claire, The doorbell rang again, cutting off whatever he'd been about to say. Dad frowned, checking his watch. We're not expecting anyone else. He went to answer it, and I heard his voice rise in surprise and then drop to a warning rumble. A moment later, Helen pushed past him into the living room, leaning heavily on a walker. There's my grandbaby, she announced, as if she had every right to be there, as if she hadn't been explicitly excluded from this meeting. Michael, let me see her. Michael looked from his mother to me, trapped between opposing forces. I stood up, my body still sore from childbirth, but my spine straight with resolve. Helen, I said, my voice calm but firm, you weren't invited today. This is Michael's time. With his daughter. Don't be ridiculous, she scoffed, maneuvering closer to the couch. I'm family. I have every right to be here. Not today, I insisted, and not without an invitation. Please leave. Helen's face flushed with anger. Michael, tell her she's being unreasonable. I came all this way. In an Uber, I specifically told you not to call, Michael interrupted, his voice surprisingly steady. Mom, I asked you to wait at home. This isn't the time. Helen blinked, clearly unaccustomed to resistance from her son. But I want to see the baby, my granddaughter. And you will, Michael said, carefully handing Lily back to me. Another day, when Claire and I have worked things out. For a moment, I thought Helen might actually respect his wishes. Then her expression hardened into familiar lines of manipulation. After everything I've done for you, she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. After my surgery, when I can barely walk, this is how you treat me? Michael's resolve visibly wavered. Mom, please don't. If you won't stand up for me, I'll leave. But remember who was there for you when you really needed someone. Remember who has always put you first. The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. As Helen turned to leave, leaning dramatically on her walker, I saw the familiar pattern reasserting itself. The guilt, the manipulation, the inevitable capitulation. But then Michael surprised me. "Mom," he said, standing up. "Stop. This isn't about you." Helen froze, her back to us. "This is about my daughter," Michael continued, his voice growing stronger, "and my wife, and the fact that I've been a terrible husband and, so far, an absent father. If you can't respect that I need to fix those things before anything else, then yes, maybe you should leave." The silence that followed was absolute. Dad, still hovering protectively near me, raised his eyebrows in surprise. Lily squirmed against my chest, oblivious to the tension around her. Helen turned slowly, her expression a mixture of disbelief and calculation. "You don't mean that." "I do," Michael said quietly. "I really do." It was the first time I had heard my husband stand up to his mother in 3 years of marriage. The first time he had definitively chosen our family over her demands. And while it didn't erase the hurt or rebuild the trust that had been broken, it was a beginning. A very small beginning, on very shaky ground, but a beginning nonetheless. Helen left that day, her exit marked by tears and accusations that fell on increasingly deaf ears. I watched Michael's face as he stood firm against her emotional onslaught, saw the conflict in his eyes, but also a resolve I hadn't witnessed in years. When the door finally closed behind her, he slumped onto the couch as if physically exhausted. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for everything." I sat across from him, Lily sleeping peacefully in my arms. "Those words mean very little without actions to back them up, Michael." He nodded, rubbing his hands over his face. I know that. I don't know where to start." "Therapy," I suggested. "Individual for you, to work through your relationship with your mother. And couples counseling for us, if we're going to have any chance of rebuilding what's been broken." "Is that what you want?" he asked, looking up at me with an uncertainty that would have moved me a week ago. "To rebuild?" I considered the question seriously. Did I want to salvage our marriage? The easy answer would have been no. After the subway incident, after his absence during Lily's birth, after years of subtle erosion of my confidence and autonomy. But nothing about this situation was easy. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "I know I want Lily to have a father who puts her needs first. I know I want to be treated with respect. Beyond that, I need time, Michael. And space. And evidence that real change is possible." He nodded again, his eyes moving to our daughter's sleeping face. "She's so beautiful," he whispered. "I can't believe I missed her birth." "Neither can I replied honestly. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was heavy with shared history, with love that had been genuine once, with the possibility of a future that looked nothing like our past. "I'll go to therapy," Michael said finally. "I'll do whatever it takes. Just, please don't give up on me completely. Not yet." It wasn't a promise. I couldn't make those anymore. But I nodded, acknowledging his commitment, allowing for the possibility that something might be salvaged from the wreckage of our relationship. He left soon after, pausing at the door to look back at Lily and me, his expression a mixture of regret and, determination. "I'll call tomorrow," he said, "to check in." "That would be a good start," I replied. Dad, who had tactfully retreated to the kitchen during our conversation, returned after Michael left. "You okay, kiddo?" I looked up at him, at the concern etched in his familiar features, and felt a rush of gratitude for his steadfast presence. "I'm okay," I said. "Not great, but okay." He sat beside me, gently stroking Lily's cheek with one weathered finger. "You know, when your mother was pregnant with you, I was terrified." "You were?" This was a story I hadn't heard before. Dad nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "Absolutely petrified. I didn't know the first thing about being a father. Kept having these nightmares that I'd drop you or forget to feed you or somehow fail in some catastrophic way." "What changed?" I asked. "Your mom sat me down one night, she was about 7 months along, and said something I never forgot. She said, 'Frank, you don't have to be a perfect father. You just have to show up. Every day, you just show up and try your best.'" He looked at me, his eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "That's what it comes down to, Claire. Showing up. Day after day, even when it's hard, even when you're scared or tired or don't have a clue what you're doing." I understood what he was trying to tell me. Michael had failed to show up, literally and figuratively, when it mattered most. Whether he could learn to be present, to prioritize his family, to make different choices going forward, that remained to be seen. "I'm glad you're showing up for us, Dad." I said, leaning against his shoulder. He kissed the top of my head. Always, sweetheart. Always. The next few weeks settled into an uneasy routine. Michael visited Lily every other day, always under Dad's watchful eye at first, then eventually alone as I began to trust that he wouldn't suddenly whisk her away to Helen's. He was gentle with her, attentive in a way he'd never been with me, and clearly besotted with his daughter. As for our relationship, we moved forward with careful steps. Michael started therapy as promised, attending sessions twice weekly with a counselor who specialized in family dynamics and enmeshment. We had brief, tentative conversations when he came to see Lily. Nothing profound, just the beginnings of honesty after years of suppressed truths. Helen was conspicuously absent, though Michael mentioned in passing that she'd returned to Portland to recuperate with her sister. I suspected the retreat was strategic rather than medical, a regrouping before her next offensive. But for now, her absence gave Michael and me breathing room to consider our next steps. 3 weeks after Lily's birth, I agreed to meet Michael at a cafe near Dad's condo. It was our first real conversation without the buffer of Lily or Dad, and I was nervous as I pushed the stroller through the door, scanning the room for his familiar figure. He was already there, seated at a corner table with 2 cups of tea waiting. He stood as we approached, his smile tentative but genuine. "Hey," he said softly. "Thanks for coming." I nodded, maneuvering the stroller beside the table. Lily was asleep, her tiny face peaceful beneath the shade of the canopy. "She just went down," I explained. "We have maybe 45 minutes before she wants to eat again." Michael smiled, his eyes lingering on our daughter before moving back to me. "You look good," he said. "Really good." I did, actually. The physical recovery from childbirth was progressing well, and there was something about making my own choices again, about being treated with respect by my father, and even by Michael in our limited interactions, that had restored some of the confidence I'd lost over the past few years. "Thanks," I said, taking a sip of the tea he'd ordered. Chamomile with honey, my favorite. "How's therapy going?" He took a deep breath. "Challenging, eye-opening, painful sometimes, but good. I think necessary." "What have you been working on?" I asked, genuinely curious. Michael glanced down at his cup, turning it slowly between his palms. "A lot about boundaries. About why I've never been able to set them with my mother. About the ways I've failed you by not setting them." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine directly. "I'm starting to understand how much damage I've done. Claire. To you. To us." It was the most direct acknowledgement of responsibility he'd offered so far. "That's a good start," I said carefully. "It's also making me look at my own history differently," he continued, "seeing patterns I never recognized before, like the fact that my mother has systematically alienated every woman I've ever cared about, from my high school girlfriend to you. I hadn't known this, had assumed Helen's controlling behavior was a response to me specifically. Why do you think she does that? According to Dr. Winters, it's classic emotional incest." His voice was matter of fact, but I could see the pain behind the clinical term. "She's been using me as a substitute husband since my father died, expecting me to fulfill her emotional needs in ways that aren't healthy. Or appropriate." The term was jarring but clarifying, putting a name to the dynamic I'd observed but couldn't articulate. "And how do you feel about that assessment? Horrified? Angry? Sad?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache slightly. "But mostly determined not to continue the pattern, not to let her come between me and my daughter the way she came between me and my wife." The distinction was subtle but important. Wife in past tense, daughter in present. I acknowledged it with a small nod. "I've been looking at apartments," he said, changing direction slightly. "Near your dad's place, so I can be close to Lily, close to you if that's something you might want eventually." The assumption that I would stay at Dad's indefinitely, rather than return to my apartment was interesting. "What about our place?" I asked. "I went by yesterday to get some more clothes," he said. "It doesn't feel like home anymore. Too many bad memories. Too much of my mother's influence everywhere I look." He hesitated. "I thought maybe you'd want a fresh start too. Somewhere she's never been." The suggestion surprised me. Michael had always been sentimental about places, reluctant to move or change his surroundings. This willingness to leave behind the apartment represented a significant shift in his thinking. "I'd like that," I admitted. "A fresh start. Somewhere that's just ours." I caught myself. "Mine and Lily's, I mean." Michael nodded, accepting the correction without protest. "I understand. one step at a time. We talked for another half hour, covering practical matters, his work schedule, Lily's upcoming doctor's appointment, the logistics of co-parenting while living separately. It was civil, cooperative, almost friendly. But beneath it all was the unresolved question of our marriage, of whether the damage could ever be fully repaired. As I prepared to leave, Lily stirring in her sleep with the soft snuffling sounds that signaled imminent wakefulness, Michael reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching mine. "I miss you," he said simply. "I know I have no right to say that. I know I've hurt you in ways I'm only beginning to understand. But I do miss you, Claire. Every day." I looked at his hand, so close to mine, yet respectfully maintaining the distance I'd established. "I miss who we were at the beginning," I said honestly. "Before everything got so complicated. Before I started disappearing. I want to find that version of us again," he said. "If you'll let me try." Lily chose that moment to wake fully, her hungry cry cutting through the cafe's ambient noise. I stood, lifting her from the stroller with practiced movements. "I need to get her home," I said, settling her against my shoulder. "But I'm willing to keep talking, to see where this goes." It wasn't a promise of reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness for all that had happened, but it was an opening, a willingness to consider possibilities I'd thought closed forever. Michael nodded, relief and cautious hope in his expression. "That's all I'm asking for. A chance." As I walked home, Lily quieting as I hummed to her, I thought about chances, about choices, about the power of 3 simple words spoken by a stranger on a subway. God sees everything. Maybe he did. And maybe, just maybe, he had orchestrated this painful journey to bring me to a place of strength I might never have found otherwise. The next month passed in a blur of baby milestones and tentative reconciliation attempts. Michael found an apartment 10 minutes from Dad's, a small but sunny one-bedroom that he furnished sparsely. "Room to grow," he explained during my first visit, though whether he meant room for more furniture or room for our relationship remained tactfully unspecified. He continued therapy, sometimes sharing insights that revealed just how deeply he was examining his past and his patterns. I started my own sessions with a compassionate therapist named Dr. Eliza Chen, who helped me work through the complex tangle of emotions I'd been carrying. Love for Michael warring with lingering hurt and distrust, newfound confidence in my own judgment, tempered by fear of making the wrong choices for Lily. We even ventured into couples counseling, sitting stiffly on opposite ends of a beige couch while a gray-haired therapist named Dr. Kaplan helped us navigate conversations we'd been avoiding for years. "What I hear Claire saying," Dr. Kaplan summarized during one session, "is that she needs to know you'll choose her and Lily if a similar conflict with your mother arises in the future. Is that accurate, Claire?" I nodded, grateful for the precise articulation of my concern. "Yes, exactly." Michael leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I understand that. And I've been working with Dr. Winters on strategies for maintaining boundaries with my mother. But I need you to understand that this isn't simple for me. I'm essentially rewiring 34 years of conditioning. No one expects overnight transformation," Dr. Kaplan acknowledged. "But what specific, concrete actions could you take, Michael, to demonstrate your commitment to prioritizing your nuclear family?" The question hung in the air between us. Michael had been full of apologies and promises, but when it came to tangible evidence of change, the picture was murkier. "I could," he began, then paused, clearly struggling. "I'm not sure what you're asking for." Dr. Kaplan turned to me. "Claire, what would meaningful action look like to you?" I considered the question carefully. "If your mother calls during our family time, you don't answer. If she shows up unannounced, you ask her to leave. If she criticizes me or my parenting, you defend me, immediately, not later in private." I met Michael's gaze directly. "And if she ever speaks to me the way she did in our home or treats me the way she did on that subway, you shut it down completely, or we walk away. No exceptions." Michael swallowed hard but nodded. "I can do that. I will do that." "Words are easy," I said, gentler now, but still firm. "I need to see it happen." We didn't have to wait long for the opportunity. 3 days after that session, as Michael was helping me assemble a bookshelf in my new apartment, a sunny 2-bedroom I'd found with, Dad's help, just far enough from the old place to feel like a fresh start, his phone rang. Helen's name flashed on the screen. Michael glanced at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. The moment stretched, taut with unspoken significance. Then, with deliberate movements, He declined the call and turned the phone face down on the coffee table. "She'll leave a voicemail if it's important," he said, returning to the half-built shelf. It was a small gesture, almost trivial in isolation, but it represented a choice, one made without hesitation, without the tortured deliberation that would have accompanied such a decision just months ago. "Thank you," I said quietly. He looked up, confused. "For what?" "For choosing us. Right now. In this moment." Understanding dawned in his expression. "It shouldn't be worth thanking me for something so basic," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "But I get why it is. And I'm going to keep doing it, Claire. Every day, in big ways and small ones, until you never have to doubt where my priorities lie again." I believed him, or at least I believed he meant it. Whether he could maintain that resolve when faced with Helen's inevitable escalation remained to be seen. We got our answer 2 weeks later, when Helen announced she was moving back to Seattle. Just temporarily, Michael assured me during a co-parenting handoff, Lily sleeping peacefully in her car seat between us. To finish her physical therapy after the hip surgery. I raised an eyebrow skeptically. "And you believe that?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "No, not really. I think it's a test. She wants to see if she can work her way back in. And can she?" His expression hardened with a resolve I was still getting used to seeing. "No, absolutely not." Helen arrived on a Tuesday, calling Michael from the airport with the expectation that he would drop everything to pick her up. Instead, he arranged an Uber to take her to her condo and met her there later. That evening, after Lily's bedtime, a boundary he'd been scrupulous about maintaining. "How did it go?" I asked when he called afterward, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "About as well as you'd expect," he replied. "She cried. She accused me of abandoning her. She said you've turned me against her." He exhaled heavily. When none of that worked, she switched tactics and started talking about how excited she is to spend time with her grandbaby. My grip on the phone tightened involuntarily. "And what did you tell her?" "That she can see Lily when we decide it's appropriate, and only under supervision. That her relationship with her granddaughter depends entirely on her ability to respect her granddaughter's mother." Another deep breath. "She didn't take it well." "I'm sure she didn't," I said, unsurprised. "But I held firm, Claire. I promise you that. I made it clear that things have changed, that I've changed, and that if she wants to be part of our lives, in whatever form that takes, she has to accept new boundaries." I wanted to believe him. More than that, I wanted to trust that this newfound strength wouldn't crumble under sustained pressure. Helen was nothing if not persistent. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "Let's see how things develop." We didn't have to wait long for Helen's next move. The following weekend, as Michael and I were enjoying a carefully orchestrated family outing to the park with Lily, part of our slow rebuilding process, Helen appeared on the path ahead of us, leaning on her cane but otherwise looking remarkably spry for someone supposedly requiring intensive physical therapy. "There's my precious grandbaby," she called, moving toward us with outstretched arms, as if the past months of conflict had never happened, as if she had every right to interrupt our time together. Michael tensed beside me, his hand tightening on the stroller handle. "Mom," he said, his voice controlled but firm, "what are you doing here?" "I was just taking my daily walk," she replied innocently, though the park was a good 3 miles from her condo. Such a happy coincidence. "Now, let me see that beautiful girl." She reached for the stroller, and Michael stepped smoothly between them. "Mom, this isn't a coincidence. You knew we'd be here." Helen's face fell into familiar lines of wounded indignation. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a grandmother wanting to see her grandbaby. Is that so wrong?" "What's wrong?" Michael said, still calm but unwavering, "is showing up uninvited to our family time after I specifically told you we needed advance notice and agreement." "Family time?" Helen repeated, her gaze sliding to me with barely concealed hostility. "Is that what you call it? Playing house with the woman who turned you against your own mother? Who's keeping my granddaughter from me?" I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the anxiety that Helen's presence always triggered, but I stood my ground. This wasn't just about Michael proving himself to me. It was about me proving to myself that I wouldn't be intimidated anymore. "Helen," I said, my voice steady, "we've welcomed you to be part of our Lily's life with clear boundaries. If you can't respect those boundaries, that's your choice, not ours." She ignored me completely, focusing on Michael with tear-filled eyes. "Sweetheart, I don't understand what's happening. Why are you being so cruel?" After everything I've sacrificed for you. Mom, stop. Michael's voice was firmer now. This isn't about sacrifice or cruelty. It's about respect. Respect for Claire as Lily's mother. Respect for our family unit. Respect for the boundaries we've set. Helen's expression hardened, the tears vanishing as quickly as they'd appeared. Family unit? You're separated. Living in different apartments. What kind of family is that? The kind where both parents put their child's needs first. Michael replied without hesitation. The kind where we're working to build something healthy, whether we end up reconciling or co-parenting separately. I glanced at him, surprised by the clarity of his statement. It was the most straightforward acknowledgement he'd made of our uncertain future. Not pressuring me to return, not assuming reconciliation, but maintaining hope while accepting reality. Helen must have seen something in my expression because her strategy shifted again. Claire, she said, her voice suddenly conciliatory. I know we've had our differences, but surely you want Lily to know her grandmother? To have that connection to her family history? It was manipulative, calculated to make me seem unreasonable if I refused. The old me might have capitulated just to keep the peace, but I wasn't that person anymore. I want Lily to know the healthy, loving parts of her family, I said evenly. People who respect her parents and the boundaries we set. People who model positive relationships and communication. If you can be that kind of grandmother, Helen, then yes, I want her to know you. Helen's mask slipped, revealing the anger beneath. You have no right to dictate terms to me. No right to keep my granddaughter away. I raised Michael without any interference from outsiders, and I will not be treated this way. That's enough, Michael said, his voice quiet but with an edge I'd never heard before. You're upset, and this conversation isn't productive. We're going to continue our walk now. I'll call you tomorrow when we can discuss this calmly. He turned the stroller around, guiding me with a gentle hand on my lower back. We walked away, leaving Helen standing on the path behind us, her protests growing louder, then gradually fading as we put distance between us. When we were out of earshot, I glanced at Michael. Are you okay? He exhaled slowly. Not really, but I'm proud of how we handled that. Together. Together. The word hung between us, weighted with history and possibility. I can't believe she followed us, I said, still processing the confrontation. I can, Michael replied grimly. This is just the beginning, Claire. She's going to escalate before she accepts that things have changed. I nodded, understanding the warning in his words. Do you think you can maintain these boundaries if she does? Really? He stopped walking, turning to face me fully. Yes, I do. Not because it's, easy. It's actually the hardest thing I've ever done, but because it's necessary. Because you and Lily deserve better than what I've given you so far. His eyes held mine, sincere and determined. I will not fail you again, Claire. Not in this. I believed him. For the first time since that day on the subway, I truly believed him. And in that moment, something shifted between us. Not forgiveness, exactly, but the possibility of it. Not reconciliation, but the foundation upon which it might someday be built. We continued our walk, talking of lighter things. Lily's newest expressions, a book Michael was reading, plans for her upcoming checkup. Just an ordinary family outing on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Except it wasn't ordinary at all. It was extraordinary. A testament to how far we'd come, and how far we might yet go. Helen's ambush in the park marked a turning point, though not the one she'd intended. Rather than driving us apart or reasserting her control, it cemented Michael's resolve and accelerated our healing process, both individually and as a tentative couple finding our way back to each other. The weeks that followed brought more tests. Helen sent tearful voicemails, showed up at Michael's apartment unannounced, even attempted to contact my father under the guise of grandparental solidarity. Each time, Michael held firm to our agreed boundaries with a consistency that slowly rebuilt my trust in him. She called me at work today, he told me one evening as we shared takeout after putting Lily to bed. We'd settled into a comfortable routine of having dinner, together 3 or 4 nights a week, sometimes at my place, sometimes at his, always with the focus on co-parenting but increasingly edging towards something that felt almost like dating again. Claimed she was having chest pains, wanted me to come over right away. I set down my fork, alarmed despite myself. Was she actually sick? I called her neighbor. You remember Mrs. Rodriguez from the condo? Bored? Asked her to check. Mom was perfectly fine, watching Wheel of Fortune with a glass of wine. He shook his head, more resigned than angry. It's the 3rd emergency this month. The boy who cried wolf, I murmured. Exactly. And that's what scares me, Claire. What if someday she really does need help, but I don't believe her? He rubbed his temples, the weight of his conflicted loyalties, visible in the tightness of his shoulders. I don't want to cut her out of my life completely. She's still my mother, but I don't know how to have a healthy relationship with someone who refuses to respect any boundaries. I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine, a gesture that had become more natural between us lately. You're doing everything you can, Michael. You've offered family therapy. You've set clear, reasonable boundaries. You've been consistent about consequences when she violates them. The rest is up to her. He turned his hand to clasp mine, his thumb tracing small circles on my palm. When did you get so wise about all this? Therapy helps, I admitted with a small smile. Dr. Chen has been guiding me through my own family patterns. Turns out I had some unhealthy dynamics with my dad after Mom died, pulling away when I should have leaned in, shutting him out when I needed support the most. I glanced toward the bedroom where Dad was staying temporarily, helping with Lily while I eased back into part-time work. We're finally fixing what broke between us years ago. Michael's eyes were warm as they met mine. I'm happy for you. For both of you. What I'm saying is that change is possible, Michael. Real, lasting change. But only when both people want it. I squeezed his hand before withdrawing mine. Your mother has to want a healthy relationship more than she wants control. He nodded, understanding the unspoken parallel to our own situation. We were rebuilding because we both wanted to, both committed to creating something healthier than what we'd had before. The question that still hung between us, unasked but ever-present, was whether that rebuilding would lead to reconciliation or simply a better co-parenting relationship. A week later, that question came into sharper focus when Michael invited me to dinner. Just us, no Lily, an actual date, at the restaurant where we'd celebrated our first anniversary. I accepted with a mixture of anticipation and caution, arranging for Dad to babysit and spending more time than I'd expected choosing what to wear. I settled on a simple blue dress I'd bought recently, one that made me feel confident and, yes, attractive, a feeling I'd almost forgotten during the later stages of my pregnancy and Helen's escalating control. When Michael arrived to pick me up, his double take and appreciative smile sent a familiar warmth through me. You look beautiful, he said, his voice soft with a note I hadn't heard in a long time. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered. Intimate lighting, quiet jazz, the kind of place where conversations weren't overheard and moments felt significant. We were seated at a corner table, far from the other diners, the perfect setting for whatever Michael had planned. After we ordered, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small box. Not the velvet kind that holds rings, but a flat, rectangular one that might contain a bracelet or necklace. My pulse quickened as he placed it between us. This isn't what you might be thinking, he said quickly, noticing my expression. It's not jewelry or a grand gesture. It's something else. Something I hope will mean more. Intrigued, I opened the box to find a key. New, gleaming, clearly just cut. It's to my apartment, Michael explained. I wanted you to have it. Not because I expect you to use it right away or move back in or anything like that. He took a breath, organizing his thoughts. It's a symbol of trust, of openness, of the fact that there are no locked doors between us anymore, literally or figuratively. I turned the key over in my palm, feeling the weight of what it represented. Thank you. That means a lot to me. He smiled, relief evident in his features. There's something else I wanted to tell you. I've been offered a promotion at work. Senior accountant, more responsibility, better pay. Michael, that's wonderful. The news was genuinely exciting. He'd been working toward this for years. It would mean more hours, at least initially. Different challenges. He hesitated, watching my reaction carefully. In the past, I might have just taken it without considering how it would affect our family, but I wanted to discuss it with you first, to make sure we decide together how this fits into our lives, our co-parenting schedule, our time with Lily, he paused, our relationship, whatever form that takes. The difference between this conversation and how it would have played out a year ago was stark. Then, Helen would have been consulted first. My opinion would have been an afterthought, if considered at all. The fact that Michael was prioritizing our family unit, treating me as an equal partner regardless of our marital status, spoke volumes about how far he'd come. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. And I think you should take it. We'll figure out the logistics together, like we've been doing with everything else. He nodded, clearly pleased but still thoughtful. There's one more thing. The most important thing, actually. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. I've decided to set a final boundary. With my mother. I waited, sensing the significance of whatever was coming. I told her yesterday that if she can't respect our boundaries, yours, mine, and Lily's, then I'll need to take a complete break from our relationship. No calls, no visits, no contact at all for at least 6 months. I blinked, surprised by the firmness of this ultimatum. How did she respond? About how you'd expect. Tears, accusations, guilt. But I didn't back down, Claire. I made it clear that this isn't a negotiation. Either she accepts that things have changed and works with Dr. Kaplan on establishing healthy patterns of interaction, or she loses access to all of us for the foreseeable future. I reached across the table, taking his hand. That must have been incredibly difficult. He turned his palm up, interlacing our fingers. It was the hardest conversation I've ever had, but also the most necessary. His eyes held mine, steady and clear. I meant what I said that day in the park. You and Lily deserve better than what I've given you so far. I'm committed to being the husband and father you both need, whether or not we fully reconcile. And that starts with proving, through consistent actions, that I will always choose our family first. Something shifted in my chest, a loosening of the last band of caution around my heart, a tentative unfurling of hope I'd been afraid to fully embrace. I believe you, I said quietly. Not just because you're saying the right things, but because you've been doing them, day after day, even when it's hard. His expression softened with evident emotion. Does that mean, are we? I squeezed his hand, understanding the unasked question. I'm not ready to move back in together. Not yet, but I am ready to start calling our dinners dates again. To acknowledge that we're not just co-parents, we're finding our way back to being partners. The relief and joy that spread across his face made him look years younger, like the Michael I'd fallen in love with, before everything became so complicated. I can work with that, he said, his voice rough with emotion. However long it takes, whatever you need, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We spent the rest of dinner talking about lighter things. Lily's latest milestone, rolling over, Dad's budding romance with a neighbor from his condo complex, Michael's brother's upcoming visit from Portland. But beneath the casual conversation was a new current of possibility, of future plans tentatively forming, of a path forward together rather than apart. As Michael walked me to my door later that evening, there was a moment. His hand at the small of my back, my face turned up to his in the soft porch light. When I thought he might kiss me, I realized with a flutter of surprise that I wanted him to. Instead, he brushed his lips against my cheek, a gesture of respect for the pace I'd set. "Good night, Claire," he murmured. "Thank you for one of the best evenings I've had in a very long time." I watched him walk to his car, feeling something I hadn't expected to feel again so soon, the sweet, familiar ache of falling in love, not with a new person, but with a better version of the man I'd married. A man who had faced his weaknesses and was working daily to transform them into strengths. A man who had finally understood what it meant to truly respect the woman he loved. As I closed the door behind me, Dad looked up from his book on the couch, Lily sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside him. "Good date?" he asked, his eyes knowing. I smiled, a full, genuine smile that felt like stepping into sunshine after months of shadow. "Yes," I said simply. "A very good date." I didn't know what the future held for Michael and me, whether we would fully reconcile or continue as supportive co-parents who had once loved each other deeply. But for the first time since that terrible day on the subway, I felt certain that whatever path we chose would be walked with mutual respect, clear boundaries, and the kind of love that builds up rather than tears down. And that, I was beginning to understand, was the most important foundation of all. 6 months later, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at me. Gone was the uncertain, diminished person I'd become during the worst of Helen's influence. In her place stood someone stronger, clearer-eyed, more confident in her own worth and boundaries. "You look amazing," Dad said from the doorway, Lily balanced on his hip. At 9 months old, she was a bundle of energy and personality. Michael's eyes, my smile, and a determination entirely her own. "Ready for your big day?" I nodded, smoothing the front of my emerald green dress. As ready as I'll ever be. Today marked a significant milestone. My official return to full-time work, not at my old event planning company, but as the newly appointed director of community outreach at a local nonprofit supporting young mothers. It was a position that leveraged both my professional skills and my personal experiences, allowing me to help women who found themselves in situations not unlike my own. Lily's diaper bag is packed, Dad continued, checking his watch. Michael should be here any minute to take you both to the ceremony. Michael and I had settled into a comfortable co-parenting routine over the past months, with Lily splitting time between our apartments and frequent family outings together. We were dating again, real dating, with conversations that went deeper than logistics and parenting decisions, with rediscovered intimacy that felt both familiar and excitingly new. We still maintained separate residences, a boundary that had initially frustrated Michael, but which he'd come to respect as essential to our healing process. I'm not saying never, I'd explained. I'm saying not yet. I need to know who I am outside of our marriage before I can fully recommit to being in it. He'd nodded, disappointment visible, but acceptance stronger. I understand. And I'll be here, Claire, for as long as it takes. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Dad gave me a final, encouraging smile before heading to answer it, Lily babbling happily in his arms. I heard Michael's voice in the entryway, warm with affection as he greeted our daughter. There's my little lion cub. Look at you in your pretty dress. Lily's delighted squeal made me smile as I gathered my purse and notes for the speech I would deliver at today's fundraising luncheon, my first public appearance in my new role. When I emerged from the bedroom, Michael's conversation with Dad faltered as his gaze found me. Wow, he said simply, his admiration evident. You look incredible. Thanks, I replied, feeling a pleasant warmth at his appreciation. You clean up pretty well yourself. It was true. The charcoal suit fit his broad shoulders perfectly, and the subtle touches of silver at his temples only added distinction to his appearance. Dad handed Lily to Michael, who settled her expertly on his arm. I've got a meeting with Ruth, Dad said, naming the neighbor he'd been seeing with increasing seriousness. But I'll see you all at the luncheon. Wouldn't miss your speech for the world, Claire Bear. After he left, Michael adjusted Lily's tiny cardigan with his free hand. How are you feeling about today? Nervous? I took a breath, considering the question honestly. A little, but mostly excited. Grateful. Ready. You're going to be amazing, he said with quiet confidence. Those women are lucky to have you advocating for them. We headed to the car, Michael securing Lily in her car seat with practiced movements before holding my door open. As we drove toward the downtown hotel hosting the event, I reviewed my notes one last time, the words blurring slightly with the emotion behind them. Did I tell you who RSVP'd last minute? Michael asked, glancing at me before returning his attention to the, road. Mabel and Frank Clark. I looked up in surprise. Really? I didn't think they'd come. After that fateful day on the subway, I'd kept in sporadic contact with the elderly couple who had intervened so decisively in our lives. Christmas cards, occasional phone calls, an invitation to Lily's baptism, which they'd been unable to attend due to Frank's minor surgery. But I hadn't expected them to come to this professional event, especially given Frank's increasing mobility issues. Apparently, they wouldn't miss it, Michael said with a smile. Mabel told me they consider you family now. The statement warmed me deeply. Family, not by blood or marriage, but by that mysterious alchemy that sometimes transforms strangers into essential parts of our lives at exactly the moment we need them most. As we pulled into the hotel parking lot, Michael reached over to squeeze my hand briefly. Before we go in, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. My pulse quickened at his serious tone. What is it? We've been taking things slowly, rebuilding trust, figuring out who we are individually and together, he began, his voice thoughtful. And I've respected your need for space and time. I still do. I nodded, wondering where this was leading. But I've been thinking, we spend most nights together anyway, either at your place or mine. Lily gets confused about where her toys are. We're constantly packing bags and driving between apartments. He took a breath. Would you consider us finding a new place? Together? Not my apartment, not yours. Somewhere that would be ours from the beginning. A fresh start. The question hung between us, weighted with significance. Moving in together again would be a definitive step toward full reconciliation, toward rebuilding our marriage on stronger foundations. What about your mother? I asked quietly. It was the elephant in the room, the factor that had to be addressed before any decision could be made. Michael's expression remained steady. She made her choice, Claire. When I gave her that ultimatum 6 months ago, she chose control over connection. She refused therapy, refused to acknowledge any problems in her behavior. His voice held sadness but also resolution. I haven't spoken to her in 5 months. I send updates about Lily through my brother, but that's it. I knew how painful that estrangement had been for him, how he'd questioned himself repeatedly during those first difficult weeks. But I also knew he'd never wavered, never compromised the boundaries he'd set. Are you sure that's what you want? I pressed. Moving in together would make it harder for her to work her way back in if she ever decides to try again. That's exactly why I want it, he said firmly. To make it crystal clear to everyone, including myself, that my priority is our family. You and Lily, the life we're building together. He reached across to take my hand. I love you, Claire. More now than ever before, because I finally understand what loving someone actually means. It means putting their needs and well-being at the center of your decisions. It means respecting their boundaries and personhood. It means showing up day after day, even when it's difficult. Tears pricked at my eyes, threatening my carefully applied makeup. You've certainly been showing up, I acknowledged, thinking of all the ways Michael had demonstrated his commitment over the past months. The midnight feedings he insisted on handling during his nights with Lily, the unwavering support of my career transition, the patient acceptance of my need for independence alongside intimacy. I'd like to keep showing up, he said softly. Every day under the same roof, building the kind of home Lily deserves. The kind of partnership you deserve. He squeezed my hand. But only if that's what you want too. No pressure, no timeline. Just something to think about. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man I'd fallen in love with, transformed by difficulty into someone stronger, wiser, more self-aware. The man who had stood between his mother and our daughter in the park, who had chosen difficult truth over comfortable patterns, who had worked tirelessly to earn back my trust action by action, day by day. Yes, I said, the word emerging with surprising certainty. I think it's time. His face lit with joy and relief. Really? You're sure? I nodded, my decision crystallizing as I spoke. I'm sure. It won't be easy. We still have a lot to work through. But I'm ready for us to do that together, under one roof. Michael leaned across the console to kiss me, a gentle, reverent kiss that spoke of gratitude and promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. Thank you for giving us another chance, for believing change was possible. Thank you for making it possible, I replied, for doing the hard work when it would have been easier to fall back into old patterns. Lily chose that moment to remind us of her presence with an impatient babble from the back seat. We both laughed, the emotional tension breaking. We'd better get inside, I said, checking my watch. The program starts in 20 minutes. The hotel ballroom was already filling with people when we arrived. Community leaders, donors, staff members from various social service organizations, all gathered to support the nonprofit's mission. I spotted Dad and Ruth at a table near the front, heads bent in conversation. My new colleagues waved from across the room, where they were arranging program materials. And there, just inside the entrance, were Mabel and Frank Clark. She elegant in a lavender suit that complemented her silver hair. He distinguished despite the cane he now relied on more heavily than before. "Claire!" Mabel exclaimed, opening her arms for a hug. "Just look at you! Radiant!" I embraced her, breathing in the faint scent of lavender that seemed to follow her everywhere. "I'm so glad you could come. Both of you. This means the world to me." Frank shook Michael's hand warmly before tickling Lily under her chin, eliciting a gurgling laugh. "Wouldn't have missed it. Not after everything you've accomplished." As we made our way to our assigned table, I caught snippets of conversation, nods of recognition from people who had heard about my story through the nonprofit's promotional materials. My journey from that humiliating moment on the subway to this platform of advocacy hadn't been easy, but it had led me to a purpose I might never have discovered otherwise. The organization's director, a formidable woman named Regina Torres, approached our table with a warm smile. "There's our guest of honor. Ready to inspire some generous donations?" I nodded, surprised to find that my earlier nervousness had dissipated. "As ready as I'll ever be." "You'll be wonderful," she assured me, checking her program. "You're up right after the first course. Just speak from the heart, like you did when we interviewed you." After she moved on, Michael leaned close. "She's right, you know. You're going to move everyone in this room. Just be yourself." When the time came for my speech, I approached the podium with steady steps, the notes I'd prepared suddenly unnecessary. I knew exactly what I needed to say. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice clear and confident. "My name is Claire Donovan, and 9 months ago, I was standing on a crowded Seattle subway, 9 months pregnant, when my husband ordered me to give up my seat for his mother. A ripple of shock moved through the audience. Michael, sitting at our table with Lily on his lap, met my gaze with unwavering support, unashamed of the truth we had both come to acknowledge. It was a moment of public humiliation that became a turning point in my life, I continued. Because when a stranger on that train spoke 3 simple words, "God sees everything," she reminded me that I deserved respect, that my child deserved a mother who could stand up for herself, that boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. I glanced at Mabel, who nodded encouragingly, her eyes bright with emotion. The organization we're supporting today does something crucial for young mothers in crisis. It reminds them of their inherent worth. It provides not just material support, but the emotional and psychological tools to recognize unhealthy relationships, to set appropriate boundaries, to build lives where they and their children can thrive. For the next 10 minutes, I spoke about my personal journey and how it had intersected with the nonprofit's mission. I talked about the courage it takes to change long-standing patterns, both as the person setting boundaries and as the person learning to respect them. I shared statistics about maternal well-being and its direct impact on child development, and I ended with a call to action that resulted in pledge cards being filled out throughout the room. The applause when I finished was gratifying, but not as meaningful as the quiet pride in my father's eyes, the subtle thumbs up from Michael, or the women who approached me afterward with their own stories of reclaiming dignity and finding strength they hadn't known they possessed. As the event wound down, our small group, Michael, Lily, Dad, Ruth, Mabel, and Frank, gathered in the hotel lobby. "We should celebrate," Dad suggested. "Early dinner, perhaps?" We settled on a nearby restaurant with a garden patio, perfect for the mild spring evening. As we walked there, Michael carrying Lily on his shoulders, I fell into step beside Mabel, who linked her arm through mine with grandmotherly affection. "I saw the way he looks at you," she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "That's a man who's learned his lesson. Who knows what he almost lost?" I smiled, watching Michael ahead of us, his attention fully on Lily's delighted squeals as he pointed out birds in the trees above. We both learned important lessons about respect, about boundaries, about what love actually means in practice, not just in words. "And what does it mean, dear?" Mabel asked, her eyes wise with decades of lived experience. I considered the question seriously. It means choosing each other, actively and intentionally, every single day. It means honoring each other's personhood, not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's difficult. It means creating space for growth and change without fear of abandonment. Mabel nodded approvingly. "That's wisdom hard won, my dear. Not everyone learns it, even after a lifetime." At the restaurant, seated around a table brightened by early spring flowers, surrounded by people who had supported me through the darkest and brightest moments of the past year, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. For the painful awakening on that subway, for the courage to draw boundaries I'd been afraid to establish, for the second chance Michael and I were carefully, intentionally building together. Frank raised his glass in a toast. "To Claire," he said, his voice wavering slightly with age but warm with affection, "for showing us that true respect is not demanded. It's earned," I finished, raising my own glass to complete the phrase that had become something of a personal mantra. Later that evening, after Lily was asleep in her crib and the house was quiet, Michael and I sat on my small balcony, looking out at the Seattle skyline glittering against the night sky. "I'm proud of you," he said, his fingers interlaced with mine, "for your speech, for everything you've accomplished this year." "I'm proud of us," I replied, turning to face him, "for doing the hard work, for not taking the easy way out." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You know, that day on the subway, when that woman said, 'God sees everything,' I was humiliated, angry. I thought she was just a busybody interfering in our business. And now? Now I think she was exactly the mirror we needed, reflecting back the truth we'd been avoiding for too long." He squeezed my hand. "I thank God for her every day, for the wake-up call that saved our family." I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid presence that had become trustworthy again through consistent, deliberate actions. "Have you thought about where we might look for a place together?" I asked, returning to our earlier conversation. His arm came around me, warm and secure. "I was thinking somewhere with a yard, room for Lily to play. Maybe not too far from your dad since he's such an important part of our lives now." "That sounds perfect," I said. envisioning a fresh start in a home untainted by past conflicts, a place where we could build new memories on the foundation of hard-won wisdom. As we sat there in comfortable silence, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. From the public humiliation on that subway to the quiet strength of this reconciliation. From the shame of standing while Helen took my seat to the pride of standing at that podium, advocating for women like myself. It hadn't been an easy path. There had been moments of doubt, of pain, of wondering if the damage was beyond repair. But through it all, I'd discovered a truth more powerful than any hurt. That respect, true, genuine respect, can transform even the most broken relationships when both people commit to earning it, day by day, choice by choice. And as Michael and I sat together, planning our future with eyes wide open, to both its possibilities and its challenges, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, we would face it as equals, as partners, as a family built on the unshakable foundation of mutual respect, not because it was demanded, but because it was earned.